Looking back now, I wonder if it was all a game to him. A well-practiced script, perfected over years of deception. Or just another day in the life of a man who couldn't help himself. At the time, I didn't see it. I didn't want to. Ryan was the kind of man who made the world feel like it revolved around you. Every glance, every word, every fleeting touch was like a magnet pulling me closer. He wasn't just charming. He had this way of making me feel like I was the only one who had ever truly understood him. I thought I had found someone extraordinary. The first few months were intoxicating. He'd show up outside my apartment with my favorite coffee just because. He knew the little things, like how I hated ketchup, but loved mustard on fries. We'd spend lazy Sundays in bed, wrapped in each other, talking about dreams we hadn't shared with anyone else. He'd say things like, "You're my safe place," and I'd melt. I fell hard and fast, but perfection has its price. The first red flag came on a Wednesday. It was a small thing. He canceled dinner last minute. He claimed he was stuck at work, something about an urgent project. I brushed it off, even joked that he'd owe me dessert for standing me up. But then it started happening more often. Dinners postponed, weekends cut short, cryptic excuses that felt rehearsed. Still, I ignored the growing unease gnawing at my gut. Love, after all, requires trust. The first real crack appeared one evening when his phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. He'd stepped out to grab wine, leaving me alone with the telltale glow of a notification. I didn't mean to look, but my eyes darted to the screen. "Did you tell her yet?" My stomach dropped. I stared at the message, heart pounding, trying to make sense of it. When Ryan returned, I asked him about it. His face shifted for the briefest moment. A flicker of panic that was gone before I could blink. "It's nothing," he said, too quickly. "Work stuff." "Who's she?" I pressed. He sighed, running a hand through his hair like I just accused him of murder. "It's complicated," he said finally. "But I promise, it's nothing for you to worry about." I didn't press further. Not because I believed him, but because I didn't want to know the truth. Weeks passed, and the unease only grew. He was distant one moment, overly attentive the next. His phone never left his pocket, and he always seemed to have an excuse ready before I even asked the question. I tried to convince myself that I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid. Then, one night, everything unraveled. It was late. Ryan had come over for dinner, but he left earlier than usual, claiming he had an early meeting. Something about the way he kissed me goodbye felt off, too hurried, too distracted. I told myself I was overthinking, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I sat on my couch for hours, replaying every interaction, every excuse, every unanswered question. And then, as if on cue, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my friend, Jenna. "Jenna? Hey, I don't know if I should tell you this, but I just saw Ryan. He's not where he said he'd be." I stared at the message, my hands trembling. I didn't want to reply. I didn't want to know. But my curiosity got the better of me. "Me where?" Her response came almost instantly. "Jenna, your building. He was leaving the apartment below yours. Isn't that where that blonde woman lives? The one with the fake everything." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. My chest tightened, my vision blurred, and a strange hollow feeling crept into my stomach. The blonde, of course. I'd seen her around, tall, tanned, impossibly perfect in that plastic Barbie-doll kind of way. I'd even joked about her with Ryan once, calling her Frankenstein's masterpiece. He'd laughed, said she wasn't his type. But now, the pieces were falling into place. I called him, it went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, until my hands were shaking. So badly, I had to put the phone down. He finally texted back an hour later. "Ryan, sorry babe. Fell asleep early. Long day. Love you." The audacity of it made me want to scream. But instead of confronting him, I did something I hadn't done in months. Went for a walk. I needed air, space, something to clear the fog in my head. As I passed the blonde's door, I hesitated. For a split second, I thought about knocking, demanding answers, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Instead, I walked away, my mind spinning with questions I wasn't ready to face. When I got home, Ryan's scent still lingered on my pillows, a cruel reminder of the man I thought I knew. I curled up on the couch, staring at the ceiling, wondering How I'd let myself get here. The next morning, I decided to confront him. But I had no idea that the truth I was chasing would only lead me deeper into the swamp of betrayal I was already sinking in. I couldn't sleep that night. Jenna's text replayed in my head like a broken record. The image of Ryan sneaking into the blonde's apartment below mine made my stomach churn. What was he doing there? How long had this been going on? Every scenario I imagined was worse than the last. By the time the sun came up, I was running on nothing but caffeine and adrenaline. I wanted answers, but I wasn't sure I was ready to hear them. What if Jenna had been wrong? What if it was all some misunderstanding? A cruel coincidence? I clung to those possibilities like a lifeline, desperate to believe there was some explanation that didn't involve Ryan betraying me. But deep down, I already knew. I decided to test the waters. Before confronting him directly, I texted him something casual, good morning. How's your day looking? Minutes passed, then an hour. No response. Around lunchtime, he finally replied. Ryan, crazy busy. Let's talk later. Love you. The words felt hollow, like he was trying to keep me at arm's length. But love you? Was he seriously throwing that in like it would erase everything? Jenna called me later that afternoon, her voice hesitant. Have you talked to him yet? She asked. I sighed, gripping my phone tightly. Not yet. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, she said. But you deserve to know the truth, you know? He's not going to just come clean on his own. Her words stung because I knew they were true. Ryan had been feeding me half-truths and excuses for months, and I'd let him. I'd convinced myself that I was the exception, that he wasn't like other men. But now, the illusion was crumbling, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. That evening, I decided to confront him. I waited until I was sure he'd be home, then called him. To my surprise, he picked up on the first ring. Hey babe, he said, his voice warm and familiar. What's up? I hesitated, my heart pounding in my chest. We need to talk, I said, finally. Sure, he said, his tone suddenly cautious. About what? I took a deep breath. About Jenna seeing you at my building, about the blonde. Downstairs. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. For a moment, I thought he might hang up. Finally, he spoke. I don't know what Jenna thinks she saw, but she's wrong, he said, his voice calm and measured. I wasn't at your building last night. I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling up inside me. Don't lie to me, Ryan. She saw you. She's not blind. I'm not lying, he insisted. I swear, I was home all night. Maybe it was someone who looks like me. Someone who looks like you. I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. How many guys with your face and your car are there in this city? His silence was deafening. Ryan, I said, my voice breaking. Just tell me the truth. Are you sleeping with her? No. He said quickly. I would never do that to you. I wanted to believe him so badly, but the cracks in his story were too big to ignore. His excuses didn't add up, and his tone, usually so confident, was shaky and uncertain. I don't know what to believe anymore, I said finally. But I can't keep doing this. I need time to think. He started to protest, but I hung up before he could say anything else. Later that night, I found myself pacing my apartment, trying to make sense of everything. My phone buzzed, and for a brief moment, I thought it was Ryan. But at WASN single quotes, it was Jenna again. Are you okay? She asked. No, I admitted. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Maybe you should talk to someone else about this, she suggested. Someone who knows him, like his friend Mark. Mark, of course. Ryan's best friend. Anyone? Knew the truth. It would be him. The idea made me nervous, but I was desperate for answers. So the next day, I called Mark and asked if we could meet up. He sounded surprised, but agreed to meet me at a bar downtown that evening. When I arrived, he was already there, nursing a beer. He looked up as I approached, his expression a mix of curiosity and concern. Hey, he said, gesturing for me. 2. Sit. What's going on? I sat down, fiddling with my drink. I need to ask you something, I said finally. And I need you to be honest with me. He raised an eyebrow. Okay, is he cheating on me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark hesitated, his gaze dropping to his beer. For a moment, I thought he wasn't going to answer. But then he sighed and looked up at me. Honestly, he said. I don't know. Ryan's complicated. He's a good guy, but he's made mistakes before. Before? I repeated, my heart sinking. Mark nodded. Yeah, he's cheated in the past. I don't know if he's doing it now, but it wouldn't surprise me. The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. I felt tears prickling at the corners of my eyes, but I blinked them away. I'm sorry, Mark said. I didn't want to say anything, but you deserve to know. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. Thanks for being honest, I said. But as the night went on, and the drinks kept flowing, something unexpected happened. Mark's concern for me began to feel like something else entirely. And when he leaned in, his hand brushing mine, I didn't pull away. I knew it was a mistake. But in that moment, I didn't care. When I woke up the next morning, reality came crashing down like a tidal wave. The faint scent of cologne that wasn't Ryan's clung to my skin, and the weight of what I had done settled heavily in my chest. I turned my head, squinting against the pale light filtering through the blinds, and there he was, Mark, still asleep, his arm draped lazily across me. My stomach twisted. How had it come to this? I slid out from under his arm as carefully as I could, grabbing my clothes and slipping into them as quietly as possible. My head was pounding, a cruel combination of guilt and the wine I'd drowned myself in the night before. I didn't even leave a note. The walk home felt endless. Every step was a battle between self-loathing and the fiery anger I still felt toward Ryan. Had I really sunk this low? The answer was obvious. Yes, I had. When I reached my apartment, I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, letting out a long, shaky breath. My phone buzzed on the counter, pulling me out of my spiral. Ryan, morning babe. Thinking about you. When can I see you? The audacity of his casual tone made my blood boil. Thinking about me? Was that before or after his little rendezvous with the blonde downstairs? I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the keyboard, unsure of how to respond. Part of me wanted to confront him, to scream and demand the truth. But another part of me, the part that was still reeling from my own betrayal, couldn't bring herself to do it. How could I throw stones when I'd just spent the night with his best friend? Instead of replying, I blocked his number. It wasn't a decision made out of strength. It was cowardice, plain and simple. I couldn't face him, not after what I'd done. The hours dragged by, each one heavier than the last. I avoided Jenna's texts and ignored the calls from Mark that started rolling in around noon. The weight of it all was suffocating. By late afternoon, there was a knock at my door. My heart sank. Open up, came Mark's voice from the other side. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. Go away, I called back, my voice shaking. I just want to talk, he said, his tone soft but insistent. Please. Against my better judgment, I unlocked the door and opened it just enough to see him. His face was a mix of concern and guilt, and it only made me feel worse. What do you want, Mark? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I want to make sure you're okay. After last night, I shook my head, cutting him off. Last night was a mistake. It shouldn't have happened. I know, he said quickly, but it did. And now we have to deal with it. His words made my stomach churn. Deal with it. How exactly did he plan on doing that? There's nothing to deal with, I said, crossing my arms. It was one night, a mistake. That's it. Mark looked like he wanted to argue, but he held back. Fine, he said finally. But you should know, Ryan's been calling me. He's worried about you. I scoffed, the sound bitter and sharp. Worried, that's rich, coming from him. Mark hesitated, then stepped closer. Look, I know he's messed up, okay? I told you last night time not defending him, but maybe you should talk to him. Get some closure. Closure. The word felt hollow, like it belonged in a cheesy self-help book. What I needed wasn't closure, it was a way out of the mess I'd made. I can't talk to him, I said finally. Not after everything. Mark didn't push further. He nodded, his expression softening. All right. Just take care of yourself, okay?" And with that, he left. The days that followed were a blur of avoidance and self-pity. I blocked Mark, just like I'd blocked Ryan, and tried to pretend that none of it had happened. But the truth was impossible to escape. It was everywhere in the silence of my apartment, in the scent of Ryan's cologne that still lingered in my closet, in the ache in my chest that refused to go away. I started drinking more than I should have, filling the evenings with cheap wine and bad TV. Anything to drown out the noise in my head. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the nagging thought that I had become the very thing I hated. One night, as I was scrolling mindlessly through social media, I saw a post from Jenna. It was a picture of her and a group of friends at a party, and there in the background was Ryan. He wasn't alone. The blonde was with him, her hand resting possessively on his arm. They looked comfortable, familiar, like a couple. My heart sank. It wasn't just a fling. It never had been. I stared at the photo for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing. All the excuses, all the lies, it had all been for her. I was just a distraction, a convenience. The anger that surged through me was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just anger at Ryan, it was anger at myself. For ignoring the signs, for believing his lies, for letting myself become part of his twisted game in that moment. I made a decision. I wasn't going to let this define me. I wasn't going to let him define me. It was time to take back control. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. It wasn't peace, not by a long shot, more like the sharp, unyielding focus of someone who had reached their breaking point. There was no going back now. Ryan had played me, lied to me, and made a fool of me. And Mark, he'd been no better. Even if his betrayal wasn't quite as deliberate. But the worst part was the role I'd played in my own downfall. I'd ignored every warning sign, every gut feeling, because I was too wrapped up in the fantasy of what I wanted my life to be. But no more. I deleted Jenna's photo from my phone. Seeing Ryan and that blonde together was too much. Then I opened my blocked contacts list and stared at Ryan's name for a long moment. Unblocking him felt like reopening a wound, but I needed closure, even if it came at the expense of my pride. I texted him, "We need to talk. Can you come over?" He responded almost immediately. Ryan, of course. Be there in 20. I laughed bitterly at his eagerness. The man had spent weeks dodging questions and giving me half-truths, yet now he couldn't wait to see me. Maybe he thought he could charm his way out of this one last time. 20 minutes later, there was a knock at my door. I opened it to find Ryan standing there, a bouquet of flowers in his hands. Roses, of course. He always went for the hay, he said, smiling that same disarming smile that had once made me weak in the knees. "I missed you." I stepped aside to let him in, ignoring the flowers he tried to hand me. His smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "How have you been?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Don't do that," I said, my voice cold. "Do what?" "Act like everything's fine. Like you don't know why I asked you to come?" Here, his expression shifted, the mask slipping for just a moment. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said. But there was an edge of defensiveness in his voice. I crossed my arms, leaning against the counter. "Cut the crap, Ryan. I know about her." "Her?" he asked, feigning confusion. "The blonde, Frankenstein's masterpiece. The one you've been sneaking around with while feeding me lies about divorcing your wife." His face went pale, but he still tried to deny it. "You're being ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "There's nothing going on with her." I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "Really? Because Jenna saw you leaving her apartment. And don't even think about telling me it wasn't you?" Ryan opened his mouth, then closed it again, his jaw tightening. He was cornered, and he knew it. "Okay," he said finally, his voice low. "Yes, I've been seeing her. But it's not what you think." I stared at him, incredulous. "Not what I think? Are you serious right now?" "It's complicated," he said, running a hand through his hair. "She's just someone I've known for a long time." "I didn't mean for it to happen, but stop," I said, cutting him off. "Just stop. Do you even hear yourself? You didn't mean for it to happen. That's the best you've got." He looked at me, his eyes pleading. "I made a mistake." "Okay, but it doesn't change how I feel about you, doesn't it?" I asked, my voice trembling with anger. "Because it sure as hell changes how I feel about you." Ryan reached for me, but I stepped back. "Don't," I said. "Don't touch me, please," he said, his voice breaking. "I love you." The words hung in the air, empty and meaningless. I shook my head, tears stinging my eyes. "Oh, you don't love me," I said quietly. "You don't even know what love is." For a moment, he just stood there, staring at me. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out the door. I thought I'd feel better after confronting him. I didn't. The anger was still there, simmering beneath the surface. But now it was mixed with a deep, aching sadness. I had loved him, or at least the version of him I thought was real. Letting go of that was like mourning a part of myself. I spent the rest of the day cleaning my apartment, purging every trace of him from my life. I threw out the flowers he'd brought, along with the ones he'd given me before. I deleted our photos, boxed up his hoodie that still smelled like him, and deleted every message he'd ever sent me. It felt cathartic, but also deeply lonely. By the time the sun set, my apartment was spotless, but I felt more broken than ever. I curled up on the couch with a blanket, staring at the blank TV screen, and let the tears come. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from Mark. "Hey, it's me," he said, his voice hesitant. "I just wanted to check in. I know things have been crazy lately, but if you need someone to talk to, I'm here." I deleted the message. Without responding, Mark had been kind to me when I was at my lowest, but that didn't excuse what had happened between us. Sleeping with him had been a moment of weakness, a way to lash out at Ryan, but it had only made things worse. I needed to break free from all of it, the lies, the betrayal, the toxic cycle I'd allowed myself to get caught in. It was time to start over. I woke up the next day feeling hollow, as if the confrontation with Ryan had drained the last of my emotional reserves. The emptiness wasn't new. I'd been living with it for weeks, but now it felt sharper, more final. There was no going back to him. No more excuses, no more lies. But even as I tried to convince myself that I was free, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd lost something, not just Ryan, but a part of myself. The version of me that had believed in love, in trust, in happily ever. That girl was gone, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever get her back. I spent the morning in a fog, mechanically going through the motions of my day. Shower, coffee, laundry. It all felt pointless, but at least it kept me from thinking too much. That illusion didn't last long. By noon, my phone buzzed with another message from Mark. "Mark, hey, can we talk?" "Please." I stared at the message for a long time, debating whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore him, to shut the door on that chapter of my life and move forward. But another part, the part that still craved answers, closure, couldn't let it go. I sighed and typed out a response. "Me? What do you want, Mark?" His reply came almost immediately. "Mark, just a conversation. Nothing more. I'll come to you if that's okay." It wasn't okay. Nothing about this situation was okay. But against my better judgment, I agreed. When Mark showed up at my door later that afternoon, he looked as nervous as I felt. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a tentative, almost sheepish demeanor. "Hey," he said, offering me a week. "Smile. Come in," I said, stepping aside to let him in. He sat on the edge of my couch, fidgeting with his hands as I perched on the armchair across from him. The tension in the room was palpable. "So," I said finally, breaking the silence. "What did you want to talk about?" I sighed, running a hand through his hair. I wanted to apologize for everything." I raised an eyebrow. "Everything for last week," he clarified. "For what happened between us. It was wrong, and I never should have let it happen." I folded my arms, leaning back in my chair. "You didn't let it happen, Mark. We both made that choice. And honestly, I don't regret it." He looked up, startled. "It was a mistake." I continued, "But it was the wake-up call I needed. You were honest with me. Mark, you didn't sugarcoat things or try to make me feel better about Ryan. You told me the truth, even when it hurt. And that's more than he ever did. Mark nodded slowly, his expression softening. I don't want you to think I was trying to take advantage of you. I care about you, and stop, I said, cutting him off. Don't do that. Do what? He asked, frowning. Don't make this about feelings or caring or whatever else you're about to say. What happened between us wasn't about any of that. It was about two people who were hurting and made a bad decision. Mark opened his mouth to argue, but then he closed it again, his shoulders slumping. Fair enough, he said quietly. We sat in silence for a while, the weight of everything unspoken hanging between us. Finally, Mark stood up, his hands stuffed into his pockets. For what it's worth, he said, I hope you find what you're looking for. You deserve better than all of this. And just like that, he was gone. After Mark left, I sat on the couch, staring at the spot where he'd been. His words echoed in my mind. You deserve better than all of this. Did I? I wanted to believe I did, but my choices told a different story. I'd stayed with Ryan even when I knew something was wrong. I'd ignored my instincts, made excuses, and let myself fall into a toxic spiral. And when it all came crashing down, I'd sought solace in someone else's arms, only to end up feeling even more lost. I'd been so focused on Ryan's betrayal, on Mark's role in it all, that I hadn't taken a good, hard look at myself. But now, with no one left to distract me, I couldn't avoid it any longer. I was the common denominator in all of this. The realization was brutal, but it was also liberating. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some semblance of control. I couldn't change the past, but I could choose how to move forward. The next few days were a blur of small, deliberate steps. I blocked Mark's number, deleted Ryan's contact information, and even unfollowed Jenna on social media. It wasn't personal, I just needed a clean slate, free from reminders of the chaos I'd let into my life. I started going for morning runs, letting the cool air clear my mind. I signed up for a pottery class, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. And slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. But the road to healing wasn't a straight line. Some days, I'd catch myself replaying old conversations with Ryan, wondering if I could have done something differently. Other days, I'd feel a pang of guilt when I thought about Mark, about the way I'd shut him out. Still, I refused to let those thoughts consume me. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me. Healing isn't linear. I'd heard that phrase a million times before, but I didn't truly understand it until now. Some days, I woke up feeling lighter, almost hopeful, like I was finally putting everything behind me. Other days, the weight of what had happened hit me like a tidal wave, pulling me under. But no matter how hard it got, I refused to go back. It wasn't just about Ryan or Mark anymore. It was about me, about breaking the cycle I'd been stuck in for far too long. I couldn't keep letting people like Ryan into my life, couldn't keep ignoring my instincts and clinging to the idea of what I thought love should be. I had to learn how to be alone. One evening, a few weeks after I'd cut ties with everyone, I found myself sitting on my balcony, a glass of wine in hand. The city buzzed below me, a symphony of honking horns and distant laughter, but for once, I didn't feel the need to escape into the noise. I thought about Ryan, about the way he'd smiled at me like I was his whole world, even as he lied through his teeth. I thought about the blonde, the way I'd reduced her to a caricature in my mind, because it was easier than admitting that she wasn't the problem he was. And then I thought about Mark. Despite everything, I didn't hate him. If anything, I felt sorry for him. He'd gotten caught up in the same toxic whirlwind I had, and while his actions weren't excusable, they were human. We'd both made mistakes, and holding on to anger wouldn't change that. I raised my glass in a silent toast to all of them, Ryan, Mark, even the blonde. They'd taught me the hardest lesson of my life. That love, when twisted by lies and betrayal, could be the most destructive force of all. But they'd also taught me something else. I deserved better. The next day, I decided to take a bold step forward. It started smaller journal, tucked into my bag as I headed to the park. I sat on a bench under the shade of a tree and let the words pour out of me. I wrote about Ryan, about the way he'd made me feel special and wanted, even as he strung me along. I wrote about the pain of realizing I'd been played, the humiliation of knowing I wasn't the only one. I wrote about Mark, about the fleeting comfort he'd given me and the shame that followed. And I wrote about myself, the version of me I'd lost somewhere along the way. The girl who used to laugh freely and believe in love without hesitation. By the time I closed the journal, I felt lighter. The words were still raw, still messy, but they were mine. It's a record of where I'd been and a reminder of where I didn't want to go again. Weeks turned into months, and slowly my life began to feel like my own again. The pottery class became a weekly ritual, a quiet escape where I could lose myself in the soothing rhythm of shaping clay. I started saying yes to invitations from coworkers and neighbors, dipping my toes back into the world without feeling like I had to explain myself. And then, one afternoon, I ran into Jenna at the grocery store. She spotted me first, her eyes widening in surprise. "Hey," she called, jogging over with a smile. "Long time no see." I forced a smile, unsure of how to navigate the conversation. "Yeah, it's been a while." She hesitated, glancing at her basket. "Look, I don't know if you're mad at me or something, but I miss you. Things have been weird since everything happened, and I just wanted to check in." Her honesty caught me off guard. "I'm not mad," I said finally. "I just needed some space to figure things out." Jenna nodded, her expression softening. "I get it, I really do. But if you ever need someone to talk to, I'm here." It wasn't a grand reconciliation, but it was enough. As time went on, I started to notice small changes in myself. I was quicker to trust my instincts, to speak up when something didn't feel right. I stopped apologizing for taking up space or asking for what I needed. One evening, as I was scrolling through my phone, I came across an old photo of Ryan and me. We were at the beach, grinning like fools, the sun setting behind us. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness. But then I noticed something I hadn't before: the way his smile didn't quite reach his eyes. The subtle distance in his posture, it wasn't real. Not the way I'd thought it was. I deleted the photo without hesitation by the time the anniversary of my first date with Ryan rolled around. I hardly thought about him anymore. The scars he'd left behind were still there, but they were fading, replaced by a stronger, wiser version of me. That night, as I curled up on the couch with a book, my phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. "Hi, it's Ryan. I was thinking about you today. Hope you're doing well." I stared at the message for a long moment, my heart oddly steady. Then, without replying, I deleted it. For the first time in months, I felt free. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, uneven process, full of setbacks and second-guessing. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's this: we can't control what others do to us, but we can choose how we respond, and I choose to move forward. That's the end of today's story. Did things turn out the way you thought, or were there some surprises along the way? Share your thoughts in the comment side. Love to hear what you think. If you enjoyed this journey, don't forget to hit the like button. And if you haven't joined the community yet, now's the perfect time. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you're always the first to catch new stories. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.